Like I've been saying, as the anti-AI plaintiffs get more and more desperate, they keep doing more and more reprehensible things. And this one is really, really bad. We're back in the Suno case here. So just to give you the history, all these music labels are suing Suno, but then in November, Warner Music Group settled with them. And then they dropped their charges. So Warner is no longer a part of the suit, but there's still all these other record labels that are still a part of it. So I just wanted to show you this right quickly because you need to know this in order to have the right context for what the labels are doing now that is desperate and just terrible bad behavior, terrible misconduct in my opinion. But Warner and defendant Suno have stipulated to a voluntary dismissal of Warner's claims against Suno, which resolves only Warner's claims against Suno and does not affect any of the other plaintiffs' claims in this case. And that was on December 9th. Now, we don't actually know what they agreed, because like most settlements, it's sealed. But they came to some kind of arrangement where Suno's gonna keep doing what they're doing and then pay Warner some money. I don't know how much it is. I'm sure it's not as much as Warner would have wanted. And it's definitely more than Suno would have wanted to pay, which in their opinion is zero because everything they do is fair use. But that's what a settlement is. It's a compromise. You meet in the middle somewhere. And both sides do that to avoid the time, expense, and consequences of litigation. Well, here's what the rest of the plaintiffs did. We're going to see this in the judge's denial of their motion, because what they asked for was ridiculous. Plaintiffs seek to expand Suno's document production collection, we're talking about discovery here, all the information they get, for 4 categories of discovery materials. And one of those is Suno's licensing of training data following its licensing agreement with Warner Music Group, as well as Suno's settlement agreement with Warner. So they want the terms of the settlement, but they also want what they're calling a license agreement. It's all the settlement. But there's some kind of thing in there where Suno's going to keep paying Warner in the future, and they're calling that a license agreement. The reason why is because they're losing and they know it. And the only way they can revive this is by using the 4th fair use factor to conjure up a market out of thin air. Because they need to show there was a market that was harmed. And Suno has said there isn't one, and they want to point to the settlement and go, look, there's a market. I hope you can see already what a dick move this is, but we'll get to it. And for those of you who are saying, hey, I'm being unfair, I'm stylizing it wrong, we'll get there. We'll hear it from the horse's mouth. But first, let's look at what the judge said, which is plaintiff's request for documents regarding the Warner Music Group settlement and associated licensing is denied. The relevance of this information is marginal, and the potential for chilling settlements in this and other cases is high. People aren't going to want to get into a settlement if they know it's going to harm them in future cases, or even in this case. If Suno had thought that agreement with Warner would have pooched their entire fair use argument, they wouldn't have done it. As Suno argues, settlements of litigation have little persuasive bearing on identifying and characterizing markets for intellectual property, which is also what you have to keep in mind when someone says, oh, so-and-so settled, that means they lost. They've been trying to do that with Bart's v. Anthropic, because Anthropic absolutely won on the fair use thing. They just have the downloads that they're still litigated, so it's a piracy case, not an AI case. Well, they're settling on that. We'll have to see if the settlement goes through. But we've just heard liars, including Deborah Ross in Congress, saying that Anthropic lost the lawsuit. That is not true. That is not true. A settlement is not the same as an adverse judgment. I mean, you could argue the other way around, too, with, I think, greater validity, because the Bart's plaintiffs really didn't want that going up to the Second Circuit, because they could have lost a lot more than that one case, and it looked like it was going against them. So they're like, oh, no, let's settle for pennies on the dollar. Let's settle for this tiny amount. And, of course, Anthropic's like, okay, we'll take that. But either way, it doesn't have any legal meaning. It's just an agreement between two parties to avoid further litigation. That's all it is. You're not supposed to be able to do anything else with it, and that's officially codified in Federal Rules of Evidence Rule 408, which specifically says, evidence of the following is not admissible on behalf of any party, either to prove or disprove the validity or amount of a disputed claim, or to impeach by a prior inconsistent statement or contradiction. And the second of those is conduct or a statement made during compromise negotiations about the claim. And one exception is when it's in a criminal case and a claim by a public office. That's not the case here. This is civil, and it's between private parties. Also, exceptions are proving a witness's bias or prejudice, negating a contention of undue delay, or proving an effort to obstruct a criminal investigation or prosecution. None of those apply. So they don't get to know what the terms of this settlement are. They don't get to know what the deal is between Suno and Warner going forward. So the judge shot him down, and that got the plaintiff's little panties in a bunch, so they're objecting to the magistrate's April 6, 2026 discovery ruling. And here's what they say. For nearly 2 years, Suno has supported its fair use defense in this litigation by arguing that no viable market exists for licensing sound recordings as training data for generative AI models. Yet in November 2025, Suno entered into the very type of agreement it claims is not feasible, a licensing deal with Warner Music Group to use copyrighted sound recordings as training data for new generative AI models. So yeah, they're talking about the settlement. So you can see I was right earlier what I said about them, and I hope you're seeing what an asshole move this is. The order treats the Warner agreement as little more than a settlement of past claims, ignoring that it is also a forward-looking commercial arrangement. So what? I say that a lot to these plaintiffs. So what? That magically makes it not be a settlement somehow. Warner and Suno could have settled Warner's legal claims and moved on, but that's not what they did. They also executed a go-forward license for Suno to use Warner's copyrighted sound recordings as training data for new AI models. It is misleading for Suno to present to the court its ongoing partnership with Warner as purely a settlement. But that's what it is. It's a settlement made to get Warner Music to dismiss the case. That is the only reason that agreement exists. It would not exist but for this litigation. The inclusion of settlement terms does not negate the fact that the agreement is, at bottom, a license and forward-looking commercial arrangement that bears on multiple issues in the litigation. See, the thing is, settlements have an element of duress. They cannot be considered markets. And also, fair use requires the market to exist at the time of the alleged infringement. In other words, the stuff you're suing them over. The things they did that made you sue. If there wasn't a market at that time, it doesn't matter that one cropped up later on. Desperation, man, they're flailing. The order's failure to consider the go-forward nature of Suno's partnership with Warner is clearly erroneous. They're really putting everything on this go-forward agreement. That should absolutely fail because even that part is born out of litigation pressure. Warner sued, Suno faced a legal risk. Both sides had a compromise. It's still a settlement. I'm sure Warner wanted to get a lot more money and thought that they might have been able to after the trial, but didn't want to go through that. They'd be willing to settle for this instead. And again, Suno would prefer to win the trial and not pay anything, but that would still be time and expense of litigation and everything. That's under duress. That's under the pressure of litigation. That absolutely contaminates any market signal. Alright, so in conclusion, they say, for the foregoing reasons, plaintiffs respectfully request that the court sustain their objections, set aside the order insofar as it denies discovery into Suno's licensing agreement with Warner, and order Suno to produce the agreement. In the alternative, if the court declines to order production, plaintiffs request the court preclude Suno from arguing at summary judgment or trial that no viable market exists for licensing or sound recordings as training data for generative AI models. See, they're really desperate to undo that fourth factor. Because unless they can conjure up a market somewhere, they lose and they know it. But again, settlements are not true markets. They don't reflect market values, but litigation risks. They're not what you would do in a free market, absent any sort of pressure or legal force or anything. Parties will overpay or underpay just to end the case. Just like I talked about with Bart's. That's exactly what's happening over there. They're completely strategic, made only to avoid the expense and consequences of the trial. They're not a market transaction. It is a compromise made under threat. It is not what a free market would have produced. And it would have a chilling effect on settlements going forward. If they can become discoverable in other cases, they're going to be a lot less willing to settle. Suno would never have agreed to whatever the agreement with Warner is if they knew it would destroy the fourth factor and make them lose the rest of the case. And it would be even more horrible, because what they fundamentally want here is for a settlement, not a judge's order, but a settlement to invalidate someone's fair use rights. You enter into a settlement because you want to preserve your rights going forward. Settlements should not be used to infringe on your rights. But the plaintiffs are in a bind and they know it. Their entire theory rests on market harm, which they cannot show, and as they keep admitting, AI actually keeps ending up being a benefit for them. But at any rate, for that to happen, a market must exist to begin with. So they're trying to conjure up a market out of thin air, out of Warner's settlement, ex nihilo. It's ridiculous. It's desperate. We'll have to see what the judge says about it. It's another one of those cases where I don't think the judge is going to be very impressed. But then, at that point, Suno ends up with a pretty solid fair use defense. So we'll have to see how that goes. So please keep watching. Comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne. Please hit like, subscribe, and the bell. And of course, donate Doppelgosity.tv to keep me doing this. One-time payments with PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, and all sorts of cryptocurrencies, or become a regular supporter with Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Get these videos early and ad-free, other benefits as well. Please check those out. Thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, stay strong and be free.